January 17th, 1944. A dense, frostbitten forest in northern Italy. The morning fog clings to the skeletal trees, masking the jagged silhouettes of German Tiger tanks lined along a muddy ridge. Their engines rumble like distant thunder, the metallic growl a promise of destruction. From the American lines, a small squad of infantry crouches behind snow-laden embankments. Their breath forms brief, ghostly clouds in the freezing air. In their hands, something deceptively simple. Crude wooden rods, sharpened and treated with explosives. The soldiers exchange wary glances, a mix of fear and grim determination etched across mud-streaked faces. No one outside this forest would have guessed. Wood, of all things, could pierce the armor of a panther or tiger. Yet here, in these shadowed trees, it is America's secret. Every moment is measured, every heartbeat amplified. A tank's turret shifts, scanning the tree line. One wrong step, and the forest will erupt in fire and steel. For the Germans, disbelief will be instantaneous. For the Americans, hope is fragile, hinging on the silent promise of something that looks harmless but can destroy the mightiest machines of war. The forest waits. The first strike is about to fall. By 1942, the landscape of armored warfare had shifted dramatically. Across Europe, the German Wehrmacht rolled forward on a tide of steel and efficiency. The panzer divisions had become the backbone of blitzkrieg, rapid, coordinated strikes that relied on armored superiority and mechanized infantry. The Tiger I and Panther tanks, emerging as symbols of German industrial might, were nearly impervious to most conventional Allied anti-tank weapons. Their thick, sloped armor could shrug off standard artillery shells and the light anti-tank rifles that had served in earlier campaigns. The United States, newly committed to full-scale engagement in both the European and North African theaters, faced a stark challenge. American infantry units were equipped primarily for conventional engagements, with standard rifles, machine guns, and mortars. Anti-tank measures were largely insufficient. The 37mm and 57mm guns could penetrate lighter German armor, but against Tigers and Panthers, they were almost useless. Field reports filtered back to Washington with increasing urgency. Frontline soldiers described the psychological shock of facing a tank that seemed untouchable, a rolling fortress of steel that could obliterate positions before infantry could react. American commanders realized that conventional firepower alone would not suffice. The war had shifted from sheer numbers and firepower to innovation, improvisation, and tactical ingenuity. In training grounds across the United States, research laboratories, and ordnance facilities, teams were tasked with experimenting on unconventional solutions. Engineers and scientists examined every conceivable material, every available resource, for its potential to neutralize heavy armor. The challenge was immense. The United States had industrial strength, but mobilization took time. Producing large numbers of specialized anti-tank weapons required raw materials, manufacturing lines, and trained personnel. Meanwhile, American forces deployed in Europe and North Africa were encountering a deadly reality. German tanks were advancing faster than new weapons could reach the front. Every delay could cost lives. It was in this context that ingenuity became a weapon in its own right. Soldiers and engineers looked not only at explosives and metals, but also at materials that were abundant, portable, and easily manipulated. Wood, seemingly ordinary and innocuous, emerged as an unlikely candidate. Treated and shaped properly, it could serve as a carrier for explosive charges. Lightweight, cheap, and capable of being deployed quickly in ambushes against armored vehicles. Field manuals began to note improvised tactics. Soldiers in training were instructed in the art of constructing anti-tank charges from available materials. Crews experimented with slings, poles, and wooden projectiles designed to carry explosives onto or near armored surfaces. The principle was simple. A direct hit on vulnerable spots of a tank could disable its tracks, compromise fuel lines, or trigger secondary explosions. Precision, timing, and bravery were paramount. A soldier wielding a wooden anti-tank device would often have to approach within tens of meters of a heavily armed vehicle. By late 1943, American commanders in the European theater had authorized limited experimental deployment. Reports from the front indicated mixed results initially. Many attempts failed due to misfires, poor placement, or miscalculations in explosive load. Yet, when successful, the psychological and tactical effect was profound. German tank crews, conditioned to fear only artillery and mines, were now confronted with infantry wielding something as innocuous as wood that could bring down their armored monsters. In essence, the weapon was a fusion of American ingenuity and necessity. It was not intended to replace conventional artillery or anti-tank guns. Instead, it supplemented them, providing a means for small units to resist superior armored forces. This approach reflected a broader shift in Allied strategy, winning through adaptability, surprise, and relentless innovation. Every material, no matter how mundane, was now a candidate for war. The scene in the Italian forests, with frost clinging to branches and wooden rods in soldiers' hands, was the culmination of years of research, adaptation, and desperate trial and error. The weapon itself was simple, yet its impact was magnified by human courage and the strategic circumstances that demanded such audacity. It was here, in the shadow of German armor, that wood became something more than timber. It became a symbol of American improvisation and the small, quiet measures that could tilt battles. This background sets the stage for understanding not only the technology behind the weapon, but also the mindset of those who wielded it. Soldiers had to combine skill, nerve, and creativity to confront the mechanized behemoths of the Wehrmacht. The United States had the industrial might to produce thousands of tanks, artillery pieces, and rifles, but mass production alone could not solve the immediate problem faced by frontline infantry. By late 1943, American units in Italy and the increasingly contested regions of northern France confronted a sobering reality. German armor was advancing with precision, and traditional anti-tank weapons lagged behind in effectiveness. Field commanders pressed for solutions that combined ingenuity with practicality. In response, the U.S. Ordnance Corps and small experimental units began systematic trials of improvised anti-tank methods. One of the more audacious concepts involved using wooden projectiles or rods as carriers for explosive charges. Unlike conventional shells, these weapons could be produced cheaply and in large quantities, often using materials that were abundant in the theater of war: hardwoods, treated timber, and even railway sleepers. Explosive cores were shaped and affixed to the wooden body, designed to detonate upon impact with vulnerable sections of a tank, the tracks, engine compartments, or turret ring. Initial tests were rudimentary. Soldiers would hurl the wooden devices from trenches or use makeshift launchers, observing how trajectory, weight, and placement affected the impact. Some experiments failed catastrophically. Wooden rods could shatter on launch, or explosives might fizzle. Yet each failure provided critical data. Adjustments were made to the composition of explosives, the length and density of the wooden shafts, and the design of impact triggers. Engineers worked closely with infantry units, testing prototypes under simulated combat conditions. These trials were laborious but vital. They demonstrated that, in skilled hands, the simplest materials could become highly effective against even the most formidable tanks. By early 1944, these wooden anti-tank weapons had reached the front lines in small numbers. Deployment required careful coordination. Infantry units were trained to approach tanks under cover, identify weak points, and strike quickly. The soldiers carrying these devices were acutely aware of the risks. One misstep, and they could be crushed by a turret or obliterated by machine gun fire. Yet the morale effect on German forces was immediate. Intelligence officers recorded reports of tank crews growing wary, confused by attacks from infantry wielding seemingly harmless objects. The audacity of American tactics began to ripple across battlefields, sowing both tactical disruption and psychological pressure. The ingenuity extended beyond the weapon itself. Commanders integrated wooden anti-tank devices into combined arms tactics, using them alongside artillery barges, mines, and aerial reconnaissance. In forested or urban environments, where tanks were vulnerable to ambush, the devices proved particularly effective. Timber rods could be deployed from concealed positions, allowing infantry to engage armored vehicles without relying solely on heavy ordnance. Soldiers learned to use terrain, weather, and timing to amplify the weapon's effectiveness. A single well-placed shot could disable a tank, force its crew to abandon it, and halt an entire advance. The Nazis, who had long relied on technological superiority and overwhelming firepower, were unprepared for this kind of battlefield creativity. Captured reports and intercepted communications reveal their disbelief. German commanders struggled to understand how small, poorly armed infantry units could repeatedly neutralize their heaviest tanks. One intelligence memo from early 1944 noted, "The enemy employs devices of seemingly insignificant construction which, despite their appearance, cause serious disruption to our armored units." The Americans had achieved something rare in warfare, turning simplicity and ingenuity into strategic advantage. This period also highlighted the human dimension of technological improvisation. Soldiers who wielded these weapons were often volunteers, selected for courage, steadiness under fire, and ingenuity. Their training emphasized not just mechanics, but situational awareness and psychological resilience. Each encounter with a German tank demanded split-second decisions, creativity, and nerve. In many ways, these infantrymen embodied the broader American approach to war, leveraging ingenuity, adaptability, and determination to compensate for gaps in conventional firepower. By mid-1944, the stage was set for a decisive application. Experimental trials had matured into practical deployment. Reports from northern Italy indicated that squads using wooden anti-tank devices could successfully engage multiple enemy tanks in a single operation, creating openings for infantry and armored units alike. These small victories foreshadowed larger, more significant engagements where American ingenuity would turn the tide, demonstrating that even the simplest materials, guided by skill and courage, could challenge the mightiest machines of war. The success of these experiments laid the groundwork for understanding the tactical, technological, and human angles of this unusual weapon, insights that would shape the way engagements unfolded in forests, towns, and ridges across Europe. To the soldiers carrying wooden anti-tank devices, the forest or urban battlefield was an arena of calculated danger. Each step forward brought them closer to towering machines armed with cannons and machine guns. The psychological weight of the task cannot be overstated. Unlike artillery crews operating from behind cover, infantry wielding wooden rods faced the full immediacy of armored warfare. Their survival depended on precision, speed, and a calm nerve under extreme stress. Eyewitness accounts from Italian campaigns described the palpable tension. Soldiers crouched behind fallen trees, their breaths fogging in the cold morning air, fingers gripping splintered wood that could end a Panther's advance or fail catastrophically. Sergeant Robert Holloway, a member of a 1944 experimental anti-tank unit, recalled, "You know the tank sees you, here's the crunch of your boots. But for a few seconds, you have a chance. That chance, that's all you've got." Moments like these crystallized the paradox of warfare. Immense machinery rendered powerless by the courage and ingenuity of a single soldier. Training focused not only on mechanics, but also on resilience. Troops were drilled to assess the environment, calculate angles, and anticipate enemy movements. This fostered a sense of agency amid chaos. Every successful strike reinforced confidence, not just in the weapon, but in human capability. The psychological effect extended beyond the American lines. German tank crews, confronted by repeated ambushes, began questioning assumptions, hesitating under fire where hesitation could be fatal. The tactical value of wooden anti-tank weapons lay in their unpredictability. German armor relied on dominance and the suppression of infantry threats, often expecting engagements with conventional artillery or mines. Introducing a seemingly innocuous weapon disrupted this balance. American units adopted ambush tactics meticulously. Soldiers positioned themselves behind ridges, in ditches, or among dense foliage, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Timing was everything. A single misstep could alert the tank crew, yet a perfectly timed strike could immobilize a vehicle and create openings for follow-up attacks. The design of operations often combined multiple elements. Infantry carrying wooden anti-tank devices would coordinate with machine gun teams, rifle squads, and sometimes light mortars. This created layered threats. As a tank attempted to navigate the terrain, suppressing fire pinned it down, while the wooden projectiles struck its tracks or engine compartment. The beauty of the tactic lay in economy and ingenuity. Unlike traditional artillery strikes, which required complex coordination and supply lines, these ambushes leveraged human skill, terrain, and simple materials to maximum effect. Commanders documented these engagements carefully. After-action reports emphasized not only the physical destruction of enemy armor, but also its psychological impact. German units, expecting overwhelming firepower to dictate the battlefield, now encountered unpredictable infantry threats. Small squads became force multipliers, capable of halting entire armored advances through ambush, coordination, and the precise use of unconventional weaponry. The combination of human bravery and tactical planning created a feedback loop. Soldiers gained confidence as ambushes succeeded, and commanders adapted strategies to exploit the new weapon strengths. Where previous approaches relied on brute force, these engagements relied on stealth, timing, and ingenuity. Forested landscapes, abandoned villages, and urban ruins became laboratories of improvisation, proving that adaptability often outweighed raw firepower. Together, these angles highlight the essence of this unconventional weapon. It was more than a tool. It was a symbol of human agency against mechanized might. The individual courage of soldiers like Holloway, paired with the strategic foresight of field commanders, demonstrated a synergy between human skill and tactical innovation. Without either element, the weapon's impact would have been negligible. As the soldiers prepared for engagement, the tension of these ambushes foreshadowed the dramatic confrontations to come. The weapon, simple in design, would prove decisive under the right hands and circumstances. Understanding the human and tactical angles sets the stage for the next perspective: technological innovation and enemy reaction, revealing why the Nazis could scarcely believe what they faced. At first glance, the weapon appeared laughably rudimentary, a polished wooden rod, no larger than a walking stick, capped with a small explosive. Yet beneath this simplicity lay careful engineering. American ordnance experts recognized that defeating heavily armored German tanks required not just brute force, but precision. Wooden projectiles acted as carriers for shaped explosive charges, designed to focus the blast on the tank's most vulnerable points. Testing was exhaustive. Engineers experimented with wood types, density, and length to optimize trajectory and impact. Hardwoods like oak and hickory proved resilient, while lighter woods offered ease of handling but risked shattering. The explosives themselves were small yet potent, carefully calculated to produce maximum effect without endangering the soldier deploying the weapon. Prototypes were launched at captured German armor on testing ranges, simulating real combat conditions. Data from these trials informed everything from the angle of approach to the placement of the explosive tip. This technological ingenuity exemplified a broader American ethos in the war: innovation born of necessity. Unlike the Germans, who relied on industrially advanced, mass-produced armor, the Americans often adapted what was at hand, turning ordinary materials into weapons of consequence. The wooden anti-tank device was deceptively modest, yet when combined with training, terrain, and timing, it became a formidable force multiplier. For the Germans, the appearance of this weapon was bewildering. Intelligence reports captured the shock among panzer crews. Troops encountered enemy devices composed of wood and small explosives. Despite their primitive construction, these inflicted critical damage on our armor. Red 1 intercepted communication. Soldiers accustomed to fearing artillery shells, anti-tank rifles, or mines now confronted something entirely unexpected, a tool that seemed innocuous yet threatened the very foundation of armored dominance. The psychological impact on German forces was immediate. Tank crews, previously confident in their near invulnerability, began approaching operations with caution. Ambushes became more feared, supply convoys slowed, and morale wavered. German commanders struggled to adapt. Conventional countermeasures, reinforced armor, mine-clearing tactics, and artillery support were less effective against infantry wielding small, agile weapons capable of striking precisely at critical points. This disbelief underscored a recurring lesson of war. Innovation often yields strategic surprise. The Germans had mastered speed, firepower, and coordination, but they had not anticipated the creative application of ordinary materials. Reports from intelligence officers noted repeated engagement failures and the growing frustration among armored units. The notion that it could destroy tanks challenged their assumptions about industrial and technological superiority. Viewed together, the technological and enemy angles reveal the full power of this weapon. Its effectiveness was not merely a function of explosives or engineering. It derived equally from human ingenuity and the element of surprise. Soldiers carried out ambushes with discipline. Engineers refined the projectile, and commanders integrated it into broader tactical schemes. The Germans, confronted with an unpredictable threat, were forced to react rather than dictate, illustrating how innovation can shift the balance even against a numerically or technologically superior foe. The weapon's success also influenced subsequent American developments. Lessons learned from these wooden anti-tank devices informed the design of portable anti-tank solutions in later campaigns. Engineers documented material properties, deployment tactics, and psychological effects, creating a knowledge base for future innovation. Even after conventional anti-tank weapons became more widely available, the principles demonstrated by these improvised devices, simplicity, precision, and adaptability, remained central to American infantry doctrine. Ultimately, these angles converge to reveal the essence of the phenomenon. The wooden anti-tank weapon succeeded not because of sheer destructive power, but because it combined human courage, tactical ingenuity, and technological simplicity. Each element reinforced the other. Bold soldiers executed carefully planned tactics with improvised yet effective tools, exploiting gaps in the enemy's expectations. The Germans, unprepared for such creativity, found their assumptions repeatedly shattered. The experiences in Italy and other theaters provided vivid case studies of this synergy. Soldiers described the surreal experience of watching a tank immobilized by a weapon that, moments before, seemed harmless. Commanders took note of the psychological ripple effects. Armored units became cautious, advances slowed, and infantry regained confidence. The combination of these factors set the stage for a dramatic confrontation where the true potential of the weapon would be realized. As these innovations matured and tactics refined, the battlefield was primed for the decisive moment. The stage was set for the climax/turning point, where American ingenuity, combined with bravery and timing, would deliver undeniable results against German armor. March 2nd, 1944. The dense hills of Monte Cassino, Italy, were shrouded in mist. American infantry units advanced cautiously, aware that German Panther and Tiger tanks dominated the ridges above. Each step forward was measured, deliberate. The soldiers knew the stakes. This was not simply a confrontation of firepower, but a test of ingenuity, courage, and timing. The first engagement unfolded as the 3rd Infantry Division crept through a narrow ravine, wooden anti-tank devices secured in their hands. From concealed positions, they waited, hearts pounding, eyes scanning the armored silhouettes looming in the fog. A Tiger emerged, tracks crunching over frozen mud, turrets swiveling methodically. For most of history, the soldiers would have had little chance. But today they had a secret weapon, deceptively simple, deadly in the right hands. A volunteer stepped forward, sliding a wooden rod along the ridge's edge to gain the correct trajectory. With a sharp toss, the projectile struck the tank's track. There was a muted thud, followed by the grinding halt of the machine. Crew members scrambled inside, confusion evident. Simultaneously, other soldiers attacked, targeting engine compartments and exposed fittings. Within minutes, one of the most feared weapons of the German army was immobilized by the simplest of materials. The psychological impact rippled instantly. German tanks halted, unsure where the attacks were coming from. Infantry that had relied on armored protection now hesitated, vulnerable to the Americans' audacious tactics. What the soldiers wielded was not just wood. It was a symbol of human adaptability, the capacity to turn scarcity into advantage. This moment was not isolated. Over the next several days, similar ambushes unfolded across the ridges and villages surrounding Monte Cassino. Wooden anti-tank devices repeatedly struck German armor, demonstrating the reliability of the design and the skill of the operators. Field reports described tank crews abandoning vehicles under bewilderment, unable to comprehend how such a simple weapon caused repeated havoc. Commanders documented these successes meticulously. They noted that, when employed in coordination with artillery, machine gun fire, and natural cover, the weapon could neutralize heavy tanks that had previously seemed invincible. Tactical doctrine evolved in real time. Ambush points were mapped, squads trained to exploit terrain and enemy patterns, and deployment schedules refined for maximum impact. The combination of human courage, tactical planning, and technological simplicity reached its apex here. Soldiers like Private Thomas Miller described the surreal scene. We watched a Panther slide to a stop in the mud. For a moment, disbelief held everyone, including us. But we knew this was our moment. One shot, one strike, and the tide had shifted. It was not merely the physical destruction of armored vehicles that defined this turning point. The German forces' confidence was shaken, morale eroded by a weapon they could neither anticipate nor easily counter. Intelligence reports captured the growing bewilderment. Commanders struggled to maintain discipline as tank units faced ambushes from soldiers wielding nothing more than wood and explosives. The engagement also demonstrated the scalability of the tactic. Smaller units could achieve disproportionate impact, disrupting armored columns and forcing adjustments in German strategy. Where once the Americans had relied on heavy artillery or air strikes, now a nimble, inventive infantry could dictate terms on the battlefield. This moment underscored a fundamental truth. Adaptability, creativity, and courage could overcome superior firepower. Monte Cassino became a proving ground. Reports highlighted not only individual bravery, but the systemic effectiveness of the weapon. By the end of March, multiple German tanks had been disabled or abandoned, their crews demoralized and cautious. The Americans had transformed wood, a seemingly innocuous material, into a decisive instrument of war. The events at Monte Cassino foreshadowed a broader pattern across the European theater. The combination of audacious soldiers, ingenious improvised weapons, and precise tactical execution had created a turning point in localized engagements. The next step would expand upon these results, showing how these tactics could alter the battlefield on a larger scale and force the German military to confront an unexpected and disorienting threat. By late March 1944, the success at Monte Cassino had emboldened American commanders. The wooden anti-tank devices, once experimental, were now integral to frontline operations. Small infantry squads were trained in coordinated ambush techniques, and reports of repeated German armor failures fueled both morale and tactical confidence. The battlefield itself seemed to bend to innovation rather than brute force. On March 25th, a combined force of the 3rd Infantry Division and elements of the 36th Infantry moved into a narrow valley near the town of Cassino. German armored reinforcements, including 2 Tiger I and 3 Panther tanks, advanced to support entrenched infantry. Visibility was limited by morning fog, and the valley's steep sides created perfect natural choke points. The Americans lay in wait, wooden anti-tank devices in hand, hearts racing. The engagement began subtly. Rifle fire and mortar bursts distracted the German crews while infantry maneuvered into position. Then, one by one, wooden projectiles struck. The first Panthers skidded on frozen mud, tracks shredded by the explosive rod. The Tiger that followed attempted to advance, only to have its engine compartment pierced. Within moments, chaos erupted. German crews scrambled, firing indiscriminately, disoriented by a threat they could not fully comprehend. Soldiers from hidden positions exploited the confusion, striking with surgical precision. Field reports from the engagement noted the unprecedented psychological impact. German commanders, who had relied on armored superiority to suppress infantry, were forced into reactive positions. Tanks that previously dictated battlefield movement now hesitated, their advances slowed, and their crews vulnerable. The Americans' use of wood as a weapon forced the Germans to rethink strategy on the fly. One intercepted report stated bluntly, "Enemy infantry employed simple yet effective devices causing severe disruption." Armored units were immobilized repeatedly. The tactical success translated into strategic advantage. The valley, previously a contested corridor, fell under American control. The combination of immobilized tanks and disoriented crews allowed artillery and supporting infantry to dominate the area. Casualty reports indicated that several German tanks were abandoned, and the crews suffered significant psychological strain, leading to decreased efficiency in subsequent operations. Beyond the immediate battlefield, the turning point had broader implications. News of these ambushes spread through frontline units, creating a ripple effect. Soldiers in other sectors began experimenting with improvised wooden devices, adapting them to local terrain and enemy patterns. Commanders recognized that even in a technologically advanced war, creativity and human ingenuity could outperform sheer industrial might. The Americans had found a way to level the playing field against Germany's most formidable armored machines. The engagement also underscored the synergy between training, courage, and technology. Soldiers were not relying on luck. They were executing meticulously planned attacks, informed by prior testing and observation. The weapon itself, simple in design, became a force multiplier because it leveraged the strengths of human adaptability and tactical insight. By early April, German units had begun to respond, deploying scouts and increasing flank security, but the unpredictability of the wooden anti-tank device remained constant. Even with countermeasures, the psychological toll endured. Tanks that once inspired fear now prompted caution, hesitation, and sometimes retreat. For the first time, American infantry could challenge the armored superiority that had long defined the Wehrmacht. The climax of these operations revealed a crucial lesson. Innovation does not require complexity, but it does demand boldness, preparation, and a willingness to defy conventional expectations. The American use of wood, a humble, seemingly harmless material, transformed the battlefield dynamic, proving that ingenuity, courage, and timing could overcome even the most fearsome enemy technologies. As the sun set over the scarred hills of Italy, the wooden anti-tank devices lay ready for the next engagement. Soldiers carried them with a quiet confidence, aware that their simple tools had achieved what many thought impossible, immobilizing machines that had terrorized the battlefield for years. The stage was now set to examine the aftermath, revealing the broader consequences for both the German and American forces, in terms of strategy, morale, and the course of armored warfare itself. The engagements at Monte Cassino and surrounding valleys left both armies with a stark new reality. German armored units, long regarded as nearly invincible in the Italian theater, had suffered repeated immobilizations at the hands of American infantry wielding wooden anti-tank devices. Reports from the front lines painted a picture of confusion, frustration, and growing caution among panzer crews. Tanks that once dominated the battlefield now paused, wary of ambushes for what appeared to be rudimentary, almost innocuous weapons. Immediate German losses were significant. Field reports from March and April 1944 indicate that several Tigers and Panthers were abandoned after crews fled, unable to repair critical track and engine damage under fire. Artillery support was often needed to finish what the wooden anti-tank projectiles had started, highlighting a new dependency. Armored supremacy was no longer guaranteed. The Wehrmacht's logistical calculations were disrupted, supply convoys slowed, and entire offensives were delayed as tank units attempted to navigate terrain increasingly dominated by American ingenuity. American forces, in contrast, experienced a surge in morale. Infantry soldiers, once facing tanks with trepidation, gained confidence from repeated successes. Private letters and field journals from the period describe a sense of empowerment. A small squad, armed with wood and explosives, could dictate the pace of battle. Sergeant Holloway recalled in his diary, "It was strange. We carried sticks into battle, and yet the enemy fled before them. Courage and cleverness felt like real weapons that day." This shift in psychological momentum proved as important as the physical destruction of armored vehicles. Commanders took note of the strategic implications. The wooden anti-tank devices did not replace conventional artillery or tank support, but augmented them, allowing small infantry units to influence larger operational outcomes. In hilly or urban environments, where tank maneuvers were naturally constrained, the devices were particularly effective. Reports emphasize the importance of coordination. Infantry squads could immobilize a tank, artillery could finish it off, and nearby armor could exploit the disruption. This interplay of forces created a battlefield where American ingenuity compensated for numerical or technological gaps. The Germans, meanwhile, scrambled to respond. Intelligence officers documented encounters with enemy devices of simple construction and instructed crews to increase caution, deploy scouts, and reinforce vulnerable points. Yet, despite these measures, the element of surprise remained potent. Soldiers who had relied on armored dominance now found themselves vulnerable to ambushes by weapons they had dismissed as insignificant. The psychological toll, coupled with physical losses, forced German commanders to rethink standard operating procedures in areas where these devices were deployed. Captured documents and post-battle reports further illustrate the effect. A memo from a German officer noted, "Infantry employing rudimentary projectiles, not previously considered a threat, caused critical halts in our armor advances. Morale among crews declined. Hesitation replaced confidence." The Americans had achieved a rare form of tactical disruption, not through sheer firepower, but by challenging the enemy's assumptions and exploiting ingenuity. Logistical ramifications followed. Repair teams were stretched thin as damaged tanks were retrieved or abandoned. Spare parts became scarce, and armored columns slowed. For the first time in the Italian campaign, the Germans experienced operational friction not because of Allied numbers or air superiority, but due to the strategic impact of small, unconventional weapons employed effectively. Beyond the battlefield, the engagements shaped training and doctrine. American units analyzed the effectiveness of wooden anti-tank devices, refining deployment strategies and sharing lessons learned across divisions. Manuals were updated, incorporating ambush techniques, terrain exploitation, and coordination principles. By the spring of 1944, what began as an experimental weapon had become a standardized tool in certain theaters, its deployment guided by experience rather than improvisation alone. The events of Monte Cassino and surrounding engagements thus marked a turning point in both perception and practice. German armored units were no longer invulnerable. American infantry gained newfound agency, and a stage was set for further operational use of these devices. The battlefield had shifted, not through numbers alone, but through ingenuity, courage, and the unexpected power of a simple wooden rod. The impact of the wooden anti-tank devices extended far beyond immediate battlefield outcomes. By mid-1944, the lessons from Monte Cassino and other Italian engagements had rippled through the Allied command structure. Infantry squads across Europe began to incorporate similar tactics, adapting the devices to local terrain and enemy behavior. The combination of simplicity, portability, and effectiveness made these weapons a versatile addition to the American arsenal, particularly in areas where heavier artillery or air support was unavailable. German commanders, meanwhile, faced a persistent dilemma. Traditional armored doctrine relied on the intimidation factor of tanks, overwhelming firepower, and rapid maneuver. Yet these engagements had demonstrated that the element of surprise, coupled with human ingenuity, could neutralize even the most advanced armor. Tank units required additional infantry support, more scouts, and heightened vigilance. Measures that slowed advances, disrupted offensive timelines, and strained already stretched supply lines. The psychological impact endured long after individual encounters. Reports from late spring 1944 noted that crews approached ambush-prone areas with caution, often hesitating for critical seconds that could decide the outcome of a skirmish. The strategic lessons for the Allies were equally significant. The success of wooden anti-tank devices reinforced the principle that innovation could compensate for limitations in firepower or logistics. Engineers and ordnance officers began to document best practices, from material selection to placement and deployment techniques. Tactical manuals incorporated these insights, ensuring that future infantry units could replicate successes systematically rather than rely solely on improvisation. By doing so, the U.S. military institutionalized a culture of adaptability and resourcefulness, lessons that would influence later campaigns in France, the Low Countries, and Germany itself. Morale effects also proved substantial. Soldiers who had faced seemingly invincible German tanks now realized that even the most daunting obstacles could be overcome with skill and creativity. Confidence increased among infantry units, creating a psychological feedback loop. Experienced soldiers trained new recruits, passing on both technical know-how and the belief that they could challenge armored dominance. This intangible advantage, confidence born from ingenuity, proved as decisive in engagements as the devices themselves. The Germans attempted countermeasures. Increased reconnaissance, reinforced flanks, and modified armor were deployed to mitigate the threat of ambushes. Yet the nature of the weapon, a small, portable device requiring minimal infrastructure, made it difficult to fully counter. Even with adaptations, the unpredictability of American ingenuity maintained a disruptive effect, forcing German units to fight reactively rather than proactively. This shift in battlefield dynamics was subtle but profound. Armored units could no longer dictate terms without accounting for an invisible, adaptable threat lurking among trees, ruins, or narrow valleys. Beyond the tactical and psychological, the wooden anti-tank devices had a symbolic impact. They represented a larger narrative of American wartime innovation. Ordinary materials, when combined with intelligence, courage, and opportunity, could yield extraordinary results. War was not determined solely by industrial output or technological superiority. Human creativity, applied with precision, could level the playing field against the most formidable adversaries. By the end of the Italian campaign, reports reflected a changed reality. German tank losses, both physical and operational, had mounted. American infantry units had demonstrated repeatedly that small, innovative tools could achieve disproportionate effect. The engagements validated the strategic principle that warfare is as much about adaptability and imagination as it is about sheer firepower. As spring turned to summer, these experiences informed subsequent operations across the European theater. Commanders and engineers carried forward the lessons of ingenuity, courage, and tactical creativity, shaping the evolution of infantry and anti-tank doctrine. The wooden anti-tank devices had done more than disable tanks. They had reshaped the understanding of what was possible in modern warfare. The story of the wooden anti-tank devices is a testament to human ingenuity in the face of overwhelming odds. In the frozen forests and misted valleys of Italy, ordinary soldiers turned timber into a weapon capable of challenging the mightiest armored machines of the German Wehrmacht. It was not the raw strength of steel or the sophistication of machinery that proved decisive, but the courage, creativity, and adaptability of those on the front lines. These engagements reveal a fundamental truth about warfare. Victory often favors the unexpected. The Americans' use of wood, simple, inexpensive, and deceptively ordinary, disrupted assumptions, forced enemies to hesitate, and created opportunities far beyond what conventional calculations might predict. Every successful ambush was a reminder that innovation can outweigh numerical or technological advantage. The human judgment, daring, and precision remain irreplaceable even amid the machines of modern war. The broader impact of these actions extended beyond the battlefield. German forces were forced to reconsider doctrine. Morale shifted in favor of troops who saw themselves capable of changing the tide with nothing more than a stick and an explosive core, and American military strategy embraced adaptability as a core principle. Lessons learned in those forests would echo through subsequent campaigns, influencing not only tactics, but also the philosophy of combat. That resourcefulness and courage are as decisive as tanks and artillery. In the end, the wooden anti-tank devices symbolize more than a tactical innovation. They represent the triumph of human will and creativity under pressure. They remind us that war is shaped as much by ideas and improvisation as by material power. Amid the destruction and chaos, soldiers' ingenuity turned simplicity into force, fear into confidence, and timber into a tool of history. The forests of Italy, scarred by battle and echoing with the memories of armored engagements, stand as a quiet monument to this ingenuity. And in that quiet, one truth endures. Even the most formidable machines can be undone, not by might alone, but by the imagination, courage, and determination of those willing to think differently in the crucible of war.